This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension for lunch, this honorable chamber was debating the estimates and expenditure, and in standing finance committee, to that we shall return.
Go ahead. Fish. I don't even know what page this is. It's head. Yeah. Go ahead. Standing finance committee resume.
Madam Chair, Head 39, Ministry of International Business and Industry, in the amount of $17,846,845.
Thank.
Honorable Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before I begin my substantive comment, I would just like to introduce the members of my team with me this afternoon. I have to my right Ms. Joan Chandler, Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of International Business and Industry. Ms. Rudette Clark, behind her, the accountant in the ministry. To my left, Mr. Kevin Hunt, Director of International Business. Behind him, Ms. Amanda Osolo, Principal Legal Officer, International Business Unit. Ms. Sanjay Watkins Diang, Senior Analyst, Monitoring, International Business Unit. Mr. Ben Arundel, our Special Advisor. Mr. Len Jamal Craig, Economist 1 in Industry. Mrs. Tamisha Rochester, Acting Registrar. Mr. Dwayne Stewart, Acting CEO, BIDC. Mr. John Rochford, Chairman, BIDC. Ms. Fern Lewis, Director, Business Support Service, BIDC. And Ms. Paula Bourne, Acting Director, Export and Business Development, BIDC. This, Madam Chair, is my team. Madam Chair, this year, this ministry is going to be spending, as you heard, some $846,845 in non-statutory expenditure. That's small, Madam Chair, in terms of overall government expenditure, but there's quite significant work to be done by this ministry. During the course of the coming financial year, this ministry is going to continue in its quest to ensure that Barbados becomes a financial services center of excellence and a place where people want to come and do business. That's only partially our responsibility because other areas of government have areas of responsibility in that regard as well, in terms of making Barbados a place where people want to come to do business. But in terms of Barbados becoming a financial services center of excellence, we have already done certain things, and there are other things that we will have to do. We've already revised our corporate tax structure. As you know, we converged our corporate tax rates, that is between the domestic companies and international business companies. We brought the tax rate down to a rate more found in the then international business sector, which was between 5.5% corporate tax rate at the top and 1% at the bottom. We therefore offered a reasonable rate of tax to all persons establishing companies in Barbados. We abolished thereby the distinction between international companies and domestic companies, and we went global by doing so, made the world our business. On June 30th this year, that process of tax convergence will in fact be complete when all entities that opted to be grandfathered, when we brought all the legislation in place by December 2018, companies that opted to be grandfathered will cease being grandfathered come June 30th this year, and therefore all entities thereafter will be genuinely called domestic companies, domestic entities. Secondly, we intend to remain being a very well-regulated jurisdiction that takes our compliance with international standards very seriously. Already, as I implied, we amended or abolished a number of our tax regimes. We, in fact, dealt with some 13 pieces of legislation which we had to deal with before the end of 2018. And as a result of what we did, as I said, we abolished the distinction between international businesses and local entities. We were forced to deal with the issue of what was being labeled harmful tax practices with our various international business regimes, ring fencing and other charges. And rather than dodging bullets all the time and just jumping through hoops and hoping for the best, we decided to come clean and just decided we would converge our tax rates, so there would be arguably there could be no possible argument that there are any distinctions among entities after that. We are now compliant, as you know, with another international standard, that of transparency and the exchange of information, also under the OECD, as the one I just mentioned also was. We were, as I said before, quite somewhat unfairly blacklisted last year. It may sound like a bit of a political point, but sometimes there can be no greater feeling of dissatisfaction than having to carry blame for something that you're not responsible for. And in fact, what was blacklisted last year, when we were blacklisted, it really was as a result of something that ought to have been done between July 2015 and June 2018, in terms of having a number of pieces of legislation in place and demonstrating the effective regulation of those pieces of legislation. Having said that, we have stuck to the task, and we were able this year to apply for and get a supplementary review by the OECD, which will take place sometime later this year. In the meantime, we have, as you by now know, Madam Chair, we have been removed from the blacklist and are now on the we are now on the grey list pending the outcome of that supplementary review. We work tirelessly at it, meeting on a weekly basis to ensure that we will be ready whenever the day is announced for the visit that takes place for that supplementary review. As a result of the tax convergence that we did, we were then deemed a no or low tax jurisdiction, which meant that we had to put in place legislative provisions to deal with what is called economic substance. Now, Madam Chair, don't get intimidated by that expression. All it means really is that companies that wish to do business in Barbados, because of the reasonable rate of tax that they would have to pay in Barbados, what are called geographically mobile entities were required to ensure that they operated genuinely in Barbados. In other words, that that their core income generating activity was actually and genuinely going on in Barbados. Don't just set up a shelf company to do minimal operations in Barbados and then claim the benefit of the reasonable tax rate that Barbados was offering. So we had to get economic substance legislation put in place, which we did. But going along with that legislation again was a requirement that you not only have laws in place, but that you effectively ensure that persons who are required to comply with that legislation are in fact compliant with it, otherwise termed effective regulation. And we took the decision there and then that we were not going to fool around with that. And it really, that became almost a pivotal point when the ministry decided that we had to move to the stage of having cutting-edge technology in the ministry. And we decided that there's no way that we were going to effectively regulate more than 1,000 companies, I believe, to see whether or not they were complying with the statutory requirements in relation to economic substance manually. That would have been a horror story. So we took the step then that we were going to move the cutting-edge technology for the ministry, and therefore we installed an IT platform where all applications in relation to economic substance that are a requirement under the legislation, that those will be able to be done online, electronically, directly into the International Business Unit, and all the processing and so on as well that would take place would also be done front-end and back-end. No one is going to walk around physically with files in their hands, but everything will be done by the use of technology. So that was the first step we took in terms of moving the ministry in the direction of cutting-edge, modern technology. But we haven't stopped there. We have decided that, again, as the ministry, the ministry, particularly the International Business Unit, as it goes about doing its work, it has to be able now to be able to, for the entirety of its operations, be able to operate on an e-platform, e-commerce on an electronic platform. So even every single application henceforth, and the work has already begun, every application going forward by anyone, any entity making an application for a license or renewal of a license, that also is going to be done online. And again, all the processing, the mining of the data, the ability to communicate that data to other government entities and agencies, all of that will now be done in an electronic manner, because we made a decision that we had to move the ministry from the manual stage. If you're to remain competitive or become competitive in a serious way in the international community, we had to move to the cutting edge of technology. So the International Business Unit, by the end of this year, is going to be fully electronic, online operations, and on the cutting edge of technology. But Madam Chair, we haven't stopped there either. Because we recognize, as I said in my introduction, that you want to make it that everyone wants to do business in Barbados and feel comfortable doing business in Barbados, and feel that their applications to start business entities and the like can be done with efficiency and speed. So if you go on from the International Business Unit into the Corporate Affairs Department, and we have now decided as well that the Corporate Affairs Department will also be fully digitalized. And to that end, we are already at the advanced stage of the finalization of the contract for work to begin to have the full implementation of an electronic platform as well for the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office. It has been an institute and a department that has been much maligned. Sometimes I can understand the complaints. Sometimes I couldn't, to be honest with you. I've gone there many times and asked for files on receipt of complaints, only to be shown where there was absolute nonsense in some of the things that had been filed there and about which people were protesting. But be that as it may, when the registry now moves to a fully electronic platform, we're no longer going to have the situation where people will labor in the thought that they've sent in an application, they've made an application online, because you can make applications online now, even now. But having made the application, all the processing is still done manually. So there's no straight through processing. But once the IT platform is installed at KIPO, you're going to see the situation where you have straight-through processing from filing for application for incorporation through to incorporation with all the relevant security features intact as well. And once that is done, and we expect that certainly before the end of the coming financial year, that will be done, hopefully well before. It will mean that in terms of the interface between this ministry and all entities relating to business and business applications, this ministry will then be fully digitalized and on the cutting edge and highly, highly competitive going forward. About that, I think we can be proud, and I believe I want to say thanks, really extend my appreciation to the officers who really were the driving force behind it and pointing out the need for it, and we have responded. And as I said, by certainly when we meet again in these chambers on this issue with our estimates, we are going to be able to say that the Ministry of International Business and Industry is fully digitalized. In terms of manufacturing and industry, there are other things to be said about international business which will come out during the course of the debate, but this is just a broad overview. In terms of manufacturing and industry, manufacturing is just an industry. Obviously, going forward, things have to be done differently. The country needs jobs. Country needs foreign exchange. That's foreign exchange either directly earned by exports or saved through import substitution. Existing capacity in the manufacturing sector has to be increased. New capacity has to be created. New products have to be developed. The truth is that to some extent, large extent perhaps, when it comes to manufacturing, the reset button has to be pressed. In the past, if you look at the manufacturing sector, you would say that it is a sector that has really benefited from a significant number of concessions, incentives, technical assistance over the years. But in recent years, it has not been in good shape. In fact, you can say that post-2006, it has been fluctuating in terms of domestic export earnings, hitting a low of some $508 million in 2010. So we have to reset the button in relation to manufacturing and recognize that the old economy based on land and capital, unilateral preferences, tax incentives and the like, that era is pretty much gone now. The new economy has to be based on technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. And going forward, I would say, as I'm sure you would have realized from this morning's presentation, that small businesses will be playing a very significant role as well going forward. As the country is going along and picking up speed in those areas, as I said, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, we still have to recognize that there are some entities in our midst that are performing, perhaps not necessarily on the cutting edge of technology, perhaps not as innovative as they should be, but they're still performing. And there's no doubt that the economy now needs as quickly a ramp up as it possibly can get. So while we recognize that you have to reset and put manufacturing on a different, far more solid footing, we still have to work with the existing entities. And I know that the BIDC, in fact, the International Trade Center has actually informed that as it stands now, well, back in 2019, I don't think it would have changed much since then, that Barbados has some $162 million in untapped export potential. That's a lot of untapped export potential. So we have to tap it. We have to tap into it. So BIDC has been working very, very diligently with a number of existing entities to get a very clear picture from them in terms of what they need to increase capacity to ensure that we can see revenue levels from our exports that not only take us back to prior years when we really excel, but even to go beyond that. We know that it is not realistic to say that we can take one giant step now and get to that conclusion in the next 5 minutes. But we have to recognize that we will work with them. We have taken the step to set ourselves a target of an increase in exports of 10%, at least 10% by 2023. And that, of course, presumes that the necessary targeted assistance is given to entities, manufacturing entities across Barbados, be it dealing with the issue of access to finance, which is the major issue confronting entities that want to operate or even more so to scale up. We have to scale up capacity, as I said earlier. We have to look at expanding the number of exportable products, assist entities in controlling or identifying where they can save some costs, operating costs. We have to look at the whole concept of clusters to make business more efficient. These are just some of the things that we have to do going forward, both in terms of international business and in terms of manufacturing, and that is my broad overview to start the proceedings today. I do believe that a lot more information will come out during the course of the discussion this afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Minister, could you move that the head stamp part?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. With those few words, I beg to move that head 39 stamp part.
Seconder? Honorable Leader of the Opposition?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I thank my honorable friend for his presentation and look forward to much more substantively as we proceed for the next while and debate this head. Now, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with it or not, there's a perception that obtains that much of what this ministry does is reactive rather than proactive. This ministry has probably brought more pieces of legislation to this honorable chamber in the last couple of years than any other ministry. I do recall one instance in which I think we dealt with 14 or 15 different pieces of legislation emanating from this ministry. But all of that was reactionary to pressures from either the OECD or the EU, the institutional global entities that seek to pressure countries such as ours, economies such as ours, into some measure of compliance on several matters. So a lot of the legislation and a lot of what we hear coming out of this ministry seems to speak to that which is reactive rather than that which is proactive. Even in his presentation this afternoon, my honorable friend from St. Michael North talked about the efforts to establish regulatory frameworks within which we could better operate as a jurisdiction, measures to ensure that there's compliance on the part of Barbados in terms of its international obligations. Talked about strictures which we have sought to avoid or to escape from with reference to harmful tax policy charges, issues of transparencies, made reference to the economic substance legislation that was also brought here, and even with respect to the upgrade, significant upgrade in the technological capacity of the ministry in order to make sure that we can probably find our fit in today's global community. So a lot of what is emphasized by the ministry seems to suggest that we respond to stimuli from the outside, and that much of the work of the ministry is reactive rather than proactive. I simply say that's a perception that one can have and that perhaps does obtain. Now, the minister did indicate very clearly that the core goal of the ministry is to ensure that Barbados becomes a financial services center of excellence. And that, of course, is a noble goal. We want to attract international financial business. We want to attract international business. And if we want to be seen as a jurisdiction appropriately platformed for receiving international business, then that is a noble goal which should be at the core of that which the ministry seeks to do. My interest in the debate, in part as it proceeds, would be finding out from the ministry what specifically is to be done by the minister and his team to ensure that Barbados returns to somewhere near its former position when this sector was contributing far more significantly to the Barbados economy. This is before changes of legislation on the Canadian side. This is before other dynamics relative to competition became a reality for Barbados, and we lost a lot of this market, and therefore a significant measure of its contribution to the Barbadian economy also was lost. So my interest will be hearing what is to be done to bring us back to a place where this sector, via this ministry, contributes as nearly as significantly as it used to do to the well-being and performance of the Barbados economy. I'm wondering about connectivity of local interests, local business interests with international business interests and international business entities. I would imagine that this ministry sees it as part of its mandate and scope to see if it can facilitate that connectivity between domestic capital and international business capital, which may be available. That linkages could be formed to attract business here, but also to build a base of domestic business as well. I'm wondering the extent to which the ministry sees a role in facilitating international business penetration by local companies. Not only that companies that operate internationally but have some interest in us as a jurisdiction can have linkages with companies on ground here, but that local companies can find their niche in the international business market and therefore take on greater levels of viability and earn foreign exchange for Barbados. The minister did mention manufacturing. I was glad that he did, because sometimes I think people seem not to recognize that this is a very important part of our economic architecture, despite the ravages in the manufacturing sector of recent decades. Yeah, there's still potential, significant potential if one observes what is happening in certain parts of the world. So what is there in these numbers, and what is therefore in the accompanying policy to these numbers that will give some impetus to the manufacturing sector? And are they, Madam, I would want to know, are there significant levels of synergy between this ministry and the ministry from which we heard earlier today, and that is the Ministry of Energy and Small Business and Entrepreneurship, and what is the relationship, synergistic relationship between these two ministries? Now, recently I've been hearing some talk about us developing trade relations and stuff with Africa, and I don't want to be misunderstood as decrying anything that is African, but I wonder if a lot of this is not premised on sentiment, and if Barbados' chances of improving our economy and developing trade links would not be better and more properly served by looking elsewhere as a greater priority. Latin America is quite closer to us, and I wonder if we're looking sufficiently there, and maybe this ministry in its inputs, its presentations during the debate will address that. the other business centers that of Asia, especially we're talking manufacturing, we're talking energy, we're talking technology. We could be looking to Asia for investment here in Barbados. The Asian markets are growing significantly. Many of the countries in the Asia region are growing significantly. We need to be looking to develop trading relationships, international business relationships with these places. I'm not too sure that Africa offers, in the context, today's context, as much as these other centers of business do. US or North America is traditional. UK is fairly traditional, although there's much room for improvement if we pursue niche market interests in those places, niche business interests in those places. But certainly Latin America and Asia, in my view, beckon. So I look forward to the debate. I commend my honorable friend for the way he leads the ministry. I commend him for his efficiency, industriousness in quickly bringing to the Parliament legislation to address issues that have the potential to affect us greatly. But as I said, we want to not have that perception that it is all about being reactive as opposed to being proactive. Thank you, ma'am.
Honorable Leader, the Opposition, I'm wondering if you would like to pose those questions now as we await further questions.
Seems to me, ma'am, you're saying that there are no questions. And I think the Honorable Minister heard me quite loudly. So I said some things there which would raise about 8 or 10 different questions, and I would invite his response to any of them or all of them.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My friend certainly asked every question under the sun. I heard quite a lot of compliments coming through what he said, and I thank him for that. Some of the questions will be answered by different people in the team. But just let me get quickly to the issue of being reactive, because sometimes I think that a bit of liberty can be taken with words. I don't know how a ministry deciding that it is going to go on the cutting edge of technology in relation to corporate affairs or in relation to the international business unit can be said to be reactive. I think that is quite forward-looking and ensuring that you can remain as competitive as you should be. Generally, I just want to say this. It's not the first time the honorable member has raised the issue of the ministry being reactive because you comply with internationally set standards. And the day that the honorable member can give me an alternative to complying is the day that I'm going to run with it. But let me say this.
Ma'am,
If you are...
Point of order, ma'am.
Honorable Leader, the Opposition.
I think the other member is slightly misleading the House. He himself might be a bit misled. I'm saying because of the emphasis often in this Parliament, it could be felt that the ministry is reactive in much of what it does as opposed to being proactive. I'm simply giving the minister and his team the opportunity to stress today those proactive elements of what they have been doing, because I'm sure they have been doing quite a lot.
Yes, but I've just outlined in my presentation the things that we are doing. But apart from that, I want to say this, that it is not realistic to think that you can decide not to comply with internationally set standards. You simply cannot decide that you're not going to do it. What you can do is that as you are doing it, you can be pursuing other avenues to deal with it as well. Barbados has had, and we would have been foolhardy not to have done. In fact, as I said earlier in my presentation earlier, the last administration did not give the level of urgency to the issue of complying with the standards set by the OECD in relation to transparency and the exchange of information. The consequence was a blacklisting. So there's no point deciding that you're going to be, as we would say in Barbadian parlance, powerful foolish, and go on your own and decide that you are not going to do things that you're asked to comply with, to just thump yourself in the chest when you get a blacklisting. That is not realistic, and that's not the way in which anyone should set out to run a ministry or a country. What I can tell you is that as we go forward vis-a-vis these international regulators, we are already putting in place a system of more constructive dialogue between us, and we've engaged a number of international partners in that regard, so that the dialogue between us and those who regulate, who seek to regulate, would be a lot more present as we go forward. We have a very good rapport with representatives of the European Union in Barbados. We have a very good rapport with the OECD, and we are going forward. But I would say this as well, that it is now no secret. Barbados is also putting all the options on the table. And if one of those options results or leads to Barbados deciding that legal action should be taken to challenge some of these things, then that will happen. What I would say is that Barbados doing it alone would almost certainly lead to nowhere, quite apart from the costs and so on. My take on this and my comment on this would be that we have to ensure that we get a number of allies on board who face like situations as we do, who will partner with us going forward to ensure that we can, in fact, sort of stand our ground, push back somewhat. But until that is done, the reality of the world that we play in, I've heard others on this side of the floor, in this very chamber, make the point already that when you're out there in the international community, you have rules and rules to play by. You can't decide that you are just going to ignore them and claim some sort of bravado. If you do not meet the standards, the consequences are blacklisting, and then the same honorable member who's now questioning me would be saying, so why on earth are you on the blacklist? So we have decided that we have to do that at the same time as we set about the pushback, as I just outlined, by way of setting up systems for dialogue, and if possible, going on to other action. I also want the honorable member to realize that when he talks about how can local entities, I'm going to start to share out some of the work here shortly, but insofar as the comment made about the synergies between connectivity between local business and international business and so on, I think the honorable member has to recognize the significance of the point that all entities in Barbados now, well, and really more so even from June 30th, will all be domestic entities, all be domestic entities. They will all be subject to the same rates of tax, and they will all be entitled to all the benefits that can be obtained by any one of them. The sole requirement will be that your earnings are in foreign currency. And if it is a 100% Barbadian-owned entity or not, everyone is entitled to all the benefits of this, that the other one would be entitled to get. So there's already a synergy that has been brought about because of the abolition of the distinction between the tax rates for local as opposed to what would formerly have been called international business entities. I believe that other questions I will pass on to, the honorable member may have to repeat some of these questions as you suggested, Madam Chair, because he threw so many of them at us that he may well have to repeat them, that we can pass them on. That we can continue to respond, I would say.
Honourable Member for St. George North. So sorry.
That's sorry. It's okay, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
St. George, thank you. Good afternoon. I want firstly to congratulate the Minister Topping, National Business and Trade, for so eloquently articulating his ministry's mission and mandate. The 15 minutes that he spent shows clearly that he goes to work every day to execute the duties that is required by this government. in terms of showing that this Ministry of International Business and Trade is indeed a critical one as we seek to build up this country on all pillars of sustainable development. But I want to ask a question specifically to BIDC. Minister, you know, we operate a trade deficit. We import more goods and services than we export. And I heard the member for St. Michael West alluding to it in his preamble to the session. But I know very well that you have strategies in place, not to overturn this trade deficit, but to reduce it. And I would like you to articulate to the country and to this chamber some of those plans as we seek to push frontiers in new areas so that the country will understand that indeed you're taking on the task and have taken on the task, and you go to work daily to push industry in this country. That's my question, just to allow the country to understand what we're doing as it relates to reducing our trade deficit, as it relates to Barbadian goods going abroad, and some of our strategies. Over to you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Honourable Member. Yes, this is something that we are taking very, very seriously. As I said earlier, there can be no denying that we have to do things a lot differently than we've been doing before. We have to take the position of ensuring that we can let companies be all that they can be. As it stands now, and I'm going to, before I turn over to the BIDC, there are companies in this country that are simply underproducing, not because they want to underproduce, but because they have reached a point where they cannot go any further without getting some sort of assistance. There are some companies that are almost up to full capacity in terms of their production, but are still willing to do more. So with the requisite injection of assistance, targeted assistance, they can do more. There's some who need a lot more help. There's some who are crying out for, as I said, financial assistance. There's some companies that will not, some activities that will not take off unless we are prepared to put people in market, in the markets that you intend to deal with, so that they can gather the necessary market intelligence and research to even guide companies here as to with whom strategic alliances should be formed. We also have no doubt to tap more so into the diaspora overseas to ensure that they can carry a lot of weight for us. And there are programs at the BIDC to deal with all of the things I just spoke about. And so as not to hog the show this afternoon, I'm now going to turn over to Ms. Fern Lewis, who will give you a far greater insight into some of the details of some of the programs I've just mentioned.
Where strategically the economy needs to go.
I'm sorry, Ms. Lewis, we missed part of what you said, and please introduce yourself.
Sorry, Fern Lewis, Director of Business Support Services at the BIDC.
Go ahead.
In response to the question as to what exactly the BIDC could be doing, or rather is doing, to help turn around industry and mobilize local businesses, we have a number of initiatives that we have already commenced and we are looking earnestly to push forward with, because we realized that we wanted to align what the BIDC is doing with what was government's main objective. And we recognize that we need to not only earn foreign exchanges via our exports, but also save foreign exchange through the efforts that we have undertaken. And so the BIDC has identified for the next 18 months a very robust program that's going to take us into capacity building for our local enterprises, such that they will be able to sell more products locally, and they'll be able to export more products, not only within the region, but beyond the region as well. In addition to building capacity for the local businesses so that they can export and they can create jobs and they can start up businesses, we have started, as a matter of fact, a startup program that is intended to put the emphasis on high potential businesses that can add jobs and that can create opportunity for saving foreign exchange, and even by that effort, be able to earn foreign exchange. The BIDC also has a robust export development plan. We've built out a tactical plan that's going to allow us to be able to match product with company with market. So we've done, for example, market research that allows us to be able to identify where the market opportunities are. And we want to be able to match the companies with the opportunity and the product with the specific market. It allows us then to be very strategic in how we put the intervention into the specific company to see the result in exports in those specific markets. So that particular plan is going to allow us to match markets that we have researched with the companies that we have on the ground that can scale up, along with the products that we are going to be enhancing. To do that, the BIDC has a product development program that is going to allow us to ensure that our products meet international standards. It also allows us to work with some of our stakeholders like UE and some of our other stakeholders who are in business development to be able to identify where there may be opportunity for new product development, because that new product development is going to throw up new products that we can make here or we can export. It also will throw up opportunities for new businesses that we can start. So through that effort, that product development effort, the robust export effort, we know that we will be able to realize the goal that Minister Toppin mentioned, which was about 10%. That 10% is not, it's not just a number. We have actually looked at the numbers and we realized that we have like the top 25 exporters in Barbados account for like 80% of BIDC's certified exports. And we believe if we put strategic intervention and support behind these exporters, that they will be able to scale up and be able to attain the target. The target translates into like 45 million by 2023. If we're able to allow these businesses to grow even at a level of like 4% each year, it's going to give us what we would require. I think it's going to work up to like 36 million from these 25 companies. The additional 9 million is going to come from the other remaining smaller entities that we are nurturing under our export readiness program. So we have a very strategic but very, very targeted approach that's intended to start up. We have a startup campaign is focused on starting up 21 businesses by the end of March 2022. So we know we need to start businesses. We have already started that effort. We have a dedicated team that is geared towards that particular effort. We know we need to export more, and we have a dedicated team that's working towards that. As it relates to markets like CARICOM, CARICOM accounts for over 50% of our market. And so we will be continuing to do more market research in CARICOM, Latin America, especially Panama, because we know we have a diaspora effort there. In terms of the export, let me just finally say we have identified specific interventions apart from export thrust here on the ground in terms of building capacity. We have a new effort. It's a marketing campaign which we've called Beijing Connect. It allows us to maximize the diaspora in a way that we have never done before. We see the diaspora as consumers. We see them not only as consumers, but as distributors, as subscribers, as investors. And so the Beijing Connect initiative is intended for us to use the diaspora in a remarkable way. It is a project that will allow them to be able to purchase more Barbadian goods. And through that effort, we are able to see those products flow into the mainstream. And that particular Beijing Connect engine is going to be launched in the UK, in Canada, in the US markets, and subsequently in the Panama market. It is one that BIDC has to do at a national level, so we will do it with stakeholders. What it does, it allows us to be able to harness a lot of real-time data from our diaspora. What do they want? How much are they buying? What are the problems they have with their products? We feed that into our exporters and into our ministry, and so we're able to give them what they want. So we have a number of programs, initiatives geared towards building exports, creating more jobs, and creating more businesses that are not only going to employ people, but that will earn more foreign exchange.
Honorable Member for St. James Central.
Just to add that,
Sorry.
just to add, Madam Chair, therefore, we were very pleased to hear the announcement on Saturday by the Minister of Foreign Affairs that in the London office there's going to be based someone who will have responsibility for, I think, diasporic affairs, I think was the expression. So that fits in very, very ideally with the plan we have in relation to utilizing the diaspora for furthering Barbados' export performance.
Thank you, Honorable Member for St. James Central.
No, that's all right. That's okay. I thank you, Madam Chair. Perhaps I should begin on the very useful note that my learned friend, the minister responsible for international business, just ended, and I want to lend my voice to those who have already indicated their satisfaction with the erudite way in which he presented on behalf of his ministry. Ma'am, the observation by the Leader of the Opposition with respect to an emerging market and destination, and I will use the language interchangeably, market and destination, like Africa, I thought was thought-provoking. And I think it gives us a moment in time, if you allow me, ma'am, just to reflect a little bit on where I think the country needs to start to bend its mind and the direction of its thinking. From a tourism perspective, ma'am, there is no doubt that traditionally Barbados has been seen, and we have actually boxed ourselves into a corner as being a cold weather destination. When I held that ministry, ma'am, you would have heard me say on the floor of this House repeatedly that I think the days for that have ended, because of the fact that if we're going to be holistic in our development, we have to be mindful of the fact that you can't be seasonal with respect to your major industry. Hollywood does not produce films 4 or 5 months a year. It does it all year round. The financial centers in the United States of America, ma'am, do not function 5 or 6 months a year. They do it all year round. And I think that we have to recognize that it does us no good to have temporary periods of unemployment, people being laid off in August in order to come back on in late October, taxi drivers without work, etc. So that from a tourism perspective, the concept of being a warm weather getaway from cold weather is a problem. And if the goodly clerks at the table would allow me to speak, ma'am, without interruption, I'd be even more obliged. If the clerks at the table would allow me to speak, ma'am, without interruption, I'd be even more obliged. So therefore, the concern that I have, ma'am, is that from a touristic development perspective, we have to look for new marketplaces. And I reflect on what the Leader of the Opposition has said, because I honestly think Barbados must now reflect on this as well. Air linkages between ourselves and Africa would help us to plug that deficiency we now have in the tourism product. But equally, ma'am, it allows us to have transportation in the belly of aircraft for our own product. From a cultural perspective, ma'am, it is again important because there's an obvious cultural and historic link between ourselves and the African continent. They, in Ghana, were the point of no return, have the point of no return, which they celebrate, ma'am, and commemorate. And equally, we were the point of first arrival, which we too must commemorate and recognize. Now, having said that, ma'am, in the context of Africa being an emerging market, my question for the minister is, does it make sense from his perspective that those products that we possess and which we sell to the world, and which are in fact recognized as being world-class, and I think specifically now of the rum industry, I think, ma'am, of the value-added products that we have done so well with in continental Europe, like, for example, those things that Lenstech prepares. Ma'am, I'm thinking in the context of development as well, not just the established industries, but industries which would be in fashion and in the cultural products like film and music, etc. And in music, again, ma'am, we are recognized as being world-class. Is it not practical from the perspective of the Minister of International Business and his team that we treat to the African continent as an emerging market which could be an opportunity for us to have the deliverables that we want in this regard? That's the first question. And then the second one, ma'am, is if he would be so good as to share with the House what work has been done with regard to trade development and the synergies between his ministry and the other critical sectors of the government that are vital towards us being able to in a holistic way, penetrate markets more effectively. In closing, ma'am, I reflect on the fact that we have only this weekend announced diplomatic postings in the African continent, and I think it is for the very relevant purpose of having people on the ground, so to speak, to assist us with the financial and commercial and related issues and well-being of Barbados. So I would like to hear the Minister on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I share the sentiments of the honorable member, minister who just spoke, and I do believe that it is in Barbados's best interest to pursue trade relationships with not only Africa, but as many places as possible, to be honest. And perhaps it can be said that we have not been as aggressive as we should have been or could have been in terms of negotiating new as many trade agreements recently as perhaps we should have. But just to strengthen the point of the honorable member and sort of to respond to the honorable member for St. Michael West, who spoke earlier about his, well, I don't know what his lack of enthusiasm, but his not so enthusiastic, relatively speaking, response to Africa as opposed to, say, Latin America. I think he mentioned specifically. Just to say that, in fact, market research has already gone on in Ghana, and preliminary though it may have been, it suggests already there are opportunities for Barbadian companies in a number of areas in Ghana. That's just one part of Africa. In fact, areas like processed meats, medical devices, condiments, seasoning, sauces, Clayton's Cola Tonic, rum, as the honorable member just mentioned, and other alcoholic beverages as well, solar water heating, we well know already, and labels. So there is every reason, in my view, to ensure that we take the African continent very, very seriously. What tends to work against Barbadian entities being able to capitalize on these trade agreements that we may make is often the logistics. You mentioned the overcoming the transportation hurdle. I'm not sure that having air transport will necessarily in and of itself solve all of the transportation issues we have in trade between us and Africa, but it certainly would play a major role. But logistics, when your goods get to Africa, how do they get distributed? So you need someone in market to be able to give you advice. You need market research. You need to ensure that to get to your goods to Africa, given the cost that might be borne, that you might have to bear, that you involve in what is called consortia, some sort of clustering, as it were, between yourselves, as many companies as possible, maybe as many countries as possible in the region, pooling together to ensure that they can minimize costs, share costs as much as possible to make these relationships work. So we do recognize the value. I share your view as opposed to the one of the member for St. Michael West, that there is worth in pursuing a relationship with Africa. I'm going to turn back over in terms of the second question you asked in relation to the synergies between the various ministries. I know for a fact that there's obviously a synergy between manufacturing and tourism. The question often arises, or is put, the statement is put, that some of the local manufacturers do not meet the standards that these other industries are looking for. The contrary view sometimes is that those sectors are being given the right to import other items, although things can be supplied that are of comparable quality locally. So that will be an argument that I guess will continue for some considerable time. But I will turn over to Ms. Fern Lewis, who can give you perhaps a bit more on-hand comment in relation to that query that you had, that second query.
Thank you, Minister Topping. Fern Lewis again. With regards the BIDC and how we are creating synergies with other ministries, I know that we have had very active engagement with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade in terms of the markets, for example, that we want to pursue. When we were thinking of doing market research in Ghana, we did some consultation with them. We have recently started the market research effort in Kenya, and we've also been in consultation with them to see how best they would wish to be, would want to advise us in that effort. So we are actively now turning our attention to the Kenyan market to see what market opportunities may exist there as well. We have also had one-on-one session and discussion consultation with the ministry in terms of the diaspora market. How do we engage the diaspora market? And so they have been actively advising us how we could go about maximizing the resources that we already have, the missions, the persons, overseas reps in those markets. And we have been discussing with them a more formal way of being able to engage all of our missions, wherever they are, to help us position Barbados goods and services around the globe. So I think the ministry has been actively involved in that. In terms of the Ministry of Small Business, we have also been collaborating with them in terms of what type of training, what type of interventions are necessary to build capacity. And through the Small Business Development Network, I think that we are also able to formalize the arrangement and the collaboration between those ministries, so that there's no overlapping of effort, there's no misuse of resources, but that we are all focused in the same direction. So I think across the ministries, the IDC have been actively looking for where we can maximize the opportunity, maximize the resources. We've even been able to reach over to University of the West Indies, for example. We know that University of the West Indies has been actively doing a lot of research. And what we have done, we are just about to sign off an MOU that would allow us to be able to formalize the relationship with them. What that does, it allows us to use the research that UWI has been doing for years. So we have not only staff, not only faculty and students doing research, but we know at the BIDC is able to take that research, work with them, and transition that research into new starts, new businesses, new products. And so we have at least one product that we know is going to have spin-offs for like 3 or 4 other businesses. So we recognize that collaboration is critical. We have a stakeholder plan, and we try to look for opportunities where we can do what we have to do better in concert with other ministries and other agencies. Thank you.
And if I may just supplement what I said earlier in response to the Honorable Member for St. James Central. As it stands now, Barbados is actually, we have a double taxation agreement with Kenya. It's actually completed. Yes, the double taxation agreement with Kenya is actually completed. We have ongoing discussions as well in relation to a bilateral investment treaty with Kenya. We have resumed negotiations of a bilateral investment treaty as well with Morocco as well. So we are doing a lot of work to ensure we can structure those relationships with those African states. And remember that investors like to know that they are making investments where their country has a double taxation agreement, and even preferably as well a bilateral investment treaty with the country to which they are going to invest. So we make movements strategically to ensure we can rope in the countries in Africa. And also, we have also decided that our bilateral investment treaty as a whole, and I would trust that the Honourable Member for St. Michael West is listening, having raised these questions earlier about reactive and so on. The question of the bilateral investment treaty that we have is under review. We've decided we should take a look at that and see to what extent it can be updated. We have already had back from the attorney working on the matter. A revised draft is currently being considered by the ministry, so that when we resume talks with some of the African states, we can actually have a more up-to-date bilateral investment treaty. We are also pursuing, just to add, talks with to formalize a bilateral investment treaty with the United Arab Emirates, a country with which we have, which is now like a financial beacon, and we want to ensure we can have a relationship with them as well, a bilateral investment treaty, so again that we can maximize the relationship between ourselves and that country. So a lot is happening. The country is moving creatively along and trying to ensure we can beef up our international relations as much as possible for the benefit of the country and its economy and its people.
Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, wish to congratulate our colleague, the Honourable Member for St. Michael North, on the tremendous work he's done in the last 3 years almost in terms of his ministerial management of this ministry, and we know it's been hard work. He's had to battle with international pressures from the developed world in terms, and as he has said, not of this government's doing, but he has ably cleaned up the mess and brought us to a situation where we're off the blacklist now. And I wanted to give Honourable Member or his team, maybe the Registrar of Corporate Affairs, the opportunity to expand a bit more in terms of what is being done at the Corporate Affairs Department in easing our ability or the ability of the ordinary citizen to do business with that department. I know the Honourable Member spoke about the digitalization, not only of that department, but of his ministry. And I believe there is a study going out at present with that department to improve its efficiency. We know that 10 years ago, even less, 8 years ago, it was taking 2 weeks, even longer sometimes, to actually form a company, whereas in our competitors, even within CARICOM, even within the Caribbean region, a company could have been formed in 1 day, and clearly we did not have the competitive edge there. So, if for the benefit of Parliament and the general public, we could hear a bit more in terms of what is being done at the corporate registry to make life easier, to improve the efficiency of that department, extremely important department in terms of formulation and establishment of companies, because we all know that this is one of the means by which we could economically enfranchise our people and create greater wealth among our people in terms of business expansion and entrepreneurship.
Just before I turn you over to the acting registrar, honorable member, just to let you know that your primary fare can be allayed, and you would know that one of the benefits of the digitalization would be actually the incorporation of a company now in between 2 to 6 business hours. But I'll let the acting registrar give you a lot more information.
Sorry, I'm afraid the sound is out.
Madam Chair?
There you go.
Okay. I am Tamisha Rochester. I am the Acting Registrar for the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office, and I will speak on the transformation of the Corporate Affairs and Intellectual Property Office that we are now embarking on. And the purpose, of course, is to ensure the ease of doing business and to ensure that it is as easy as possible for business persons to be able to complete their corporate filings and corporate responsibilities and as seamless as possible. What we are trying to do is bring the office into the 21st century by modernizing its operations and increasing the efficiency of the office by drastically reducing the timelines for processing. This is even more critical in light of the current situation with the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the measures we've been forced to put in place in order to ensure continuity of business during the physical limitations on the movement of persons. So currently, KIPO utilizes a system called the AS400, whereby persons, if they're filing online, they must first register with KIPO. They deposit funds on an account, and they're able to submit their documents to our online system. However, the back-end processing is still the same as a manual system. So our officers still have to retrieve the files and have to process the documents manually. It is not a straight-through system. What we are looking at, and as the Minister Toppin said, we are in the final stages of negotiating the contract for a system that can provide a straight-through processing from filing of the document up to the issuance of the certificate, fully online, utilizing the latest technology and smart forms, etc., where persons enter the required information directly into the database, and it is automatically uploaded and saved to the database, and it utilizes the smart technology for the processing, generates the certificate, and returns it back to the person electronically, all within 2 to 6 business hours. And this goes not only for the incorporation of companies and the registering of business names, but also for the post-incorporation matters. So there are several matters such as amendments to company articles, continuances, discontinuances, dissolution of companies, a wide range of activities and transactions a company may perform that are either done by the old-fashioned paper method in the office or by our limited system using the AS400 platform that we currently use. So these will all be included on the online system for the full straight-through processing. So it means that a user can log in, to the website. You just select whichever transaction you're doing. All of the information is there, and it guides you as you go through each field, so that when you enter and you click submit, we know that we are getting information in our database that is correct, that is accurate, and that is in accordance with the legislation that is in force. What we have found with the current system using the old paper method is that a lot of the times there is back and forth over the documentation, and persons forgetting to fill in items and items that do not conform to the legislation, etc. So what this new system will do is eliminate all of that. It will have the built-in checks and verification processes, so that when you enter information into a field, it is guaranteed to be the right information for that field, and also guaranteed to conform to all of the parameters that are existing for that piece of information. So as I said, it will result drastically in the reduced timelines, and also make it easier for persons, the average person, to be able to complete the forms and complete their filings, being guided by the system. Now, we also have built in addition to the requisite training, etc., we also recognize that there will be persons who may not be au fait with technology. We are also making provision for a help desk service where they can get assistance at the office to complete the filings, to fill out the form using our resources, our computers, what have you, on the system, so those persons will not be left out by any means. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rochester. Madam Chair, two follow-up questions I believe I can have. One would be on intellectual property, industrial designs. I believe I am correct in saying that we haven't really had any fundamental change in legislation in terms of industrial design since the Act came into force in 1985. I believe it might have been one or two slight amendments, but nothing in terms of fundamental change. And of course, this is a major area dealing with protection of proprietary rights of inventors, and there must be legislative grounding for people to feel confident in terms of, their entrepreneurship, their creativity, their innovation, for inventions and progressive advancement in terms of business ideas and concepts and thoughts. And I'm just wondering if the Honorable Minister, or again, maybe someone senior in his team, could give the Parliament and Barbados an idea into the policy basis in advancing the cause, or any legislative proposals in terms of advancing protection of intellectual property rights and industrial designs.
In relation to the intellectual property aspect of the office, and in particular the industrial designs, Barbados has signed on to the TRIPS agreement, and one of the provisions of that agreement, in addition to trademarks, copyright, etc., it includes the basic minimum requirements that any country's legislation should have for industrial designs. So one of our exercises we're currently undergoing is a review of not only the industrial designs legislation, but all of the intellectual property legislation to ensure compliance with TRIPS, and to make sure that we are as up to date and as current as possible. I know recently completed was the draft of the copyright legislation, which is at the stage of a cabinet paper. And also on the cards is the review of the trademarks legislation and the other intellectual property legislation. Thank you.
And thank you, Madam Registrar, for that information. And my final intervention on under this head, Madam Chair, would be on double taxation agreements. Honorable Minister spoke about bilateral investment treaties that we are in train with other sovereign states globally, but I'm wondering about double taxation agreements. Again, this was a thrust that would have started under previous Barbados Labour Party administration in earnest, and under the Right Honourable Tom Adams. And just wondering where we are at, what is the policy in going forward in terms of acquiring more or entering into more double taxation agreements with sovereign states for the benefit of Barbados.
Just to say, Honourable Member, that we currently have 40 double taxation agreements, including CARICOM. We have 11 bilateral investment treaties, and we intend to roll out as many with strategically as possible. But I would ask the Director of International Business, who obviously feels left out today so far, to give you a bit more insight into that aspect.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister Toppin. Just to answer the honourable member's question a little further.
Sorry,
yes,
just
please.
to introduce yourself, please.
My apologies, Chair. Kevin Hunt, Director of International Business.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just to add to what Minister Toppin has said, we have reached a stage where, like the bilateral investment treaties, we've had to look at revamping and reviewing our double taxation agreements, because we need to make sure that we are providing a framework that is conducive to investment and business facilitation. And so we are at the stage where we are reviewing our double taxation agreement so that we can ensure that as we pursue engaging other countries with a view to enter into double taxation agreements with them, that we are presenting something that is current and something that is conducive to investment. As a corollary to that, Barbados has signed on to the MLI, the Multilateral Investment Treaty out of the OECD, which has ensured that we have brought alongside of our double taxation agreements minimum standards as it relates to ensuring that we are not engaging in base erosion and profit shifting. And so that in itself will make us competitive and also attractive from the point of view that we're coming with the quote-unquote stamp of approval, where our double taxation agreements are not or cannot be accused of being utilized to engage in treaty shopping or to be engaged in base erosion and profit shifting. Thank you.
Honourable Member for St. James South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe the Honourable Member for St. Michael West had raised some concerns about the focus on Africa and not a focus on Asia or Latin America. And I just wanted to put a question to the Ministry in relation to what is being done. From my knowledge, I know that along with opening embassies in Africa, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, we have representatives in Panama, we have representatives in Venezuela, in Brazil, and a lot of those persons who represent us there are going to have non-resident accreditation to other countries in Latin America. And we also have a number of bilateral trade agreements with countries in Latin America, such as Costa Rica, we've got Colombia, we've got Venezuela, and then with other Spanish-speaking territories like Dominican Republic, Costa Rica, etc. What I want to ask Ms. Lewis is, based on the plans that she outlined for the sector, how would those areas be included in terms of the new trade thrust? And also to ask this entire revamping exercise in terms of the reset button, as was ably expressed by the minister, the pressing of this reset button, what kind of opportunities, benefit, and value will this new thrust in both Africa, Latin America, and in CARICOM, how will they be able to benefit significantly, and what is it they may need to do to participate fully in this exercise so that we can get a change in how Barbadian enterprises engage trade?
Thank you, Minister Husbands. What we have done, Madam Chair, the BIDC has had a number of consultations with our diplomatic reps abroad. Quite recently, we did have a consultation with our representatives in Latin America. And so we sought to ascertain from them strategically how could we work closer with them to be able to identify the opportunities and then be able to action the opportunities. One specific area that they raised that they wanted us to have a second look was in regards to the Barbados Blackbelly Sheep Leather Project. They thought that there was significant opportunity there. And so on our end, we have committed to identifying the current status of that initiative. I know the BIDC itself has had some previous undertakings in that regard, but that is an area that they have expressed interest, and so we believe by supporting them, we might be able to uncover where there might be opportunities for us to actually make products from that particular leather that may even be luxury goods. In terms of the collaboration and across the region, we have identified a number of, we do have MOUs with sister agencies in Guyana, in Jamaica, in Trinidad. And what we try to do is to leverage these relationships so that it allows us to be able to garner business intelligence on the ground, for us to be able to identify in-market support that would allow our producers or exporters to be able to have actual work that's required done in those markets. The Latin American market is particularly useful for us because we know that there's a diaspora group in Panama, and so we have done some market research in Panama. We need to leverage it. We need to identify how we can better position local businesses in Latin America. One of the challenges that we have faced is the language barrier, and so we have actually been looking at how do we create a scenario where we can create that in-market, that market rep presence in these markets that would allow our local businesses to still be able to negotiate and navigate opportunities that may exist there. When we look at CARICOM, for example, we realize that there are a lot of market areas, there are a lot of product areas that still have significant opportunity for us. And so we have run the numbers. We look at the imports into our CARICOM countries, and we see where there are opportunities for us to be able to scale up our production. For example, if you look at an area like meat substitutes, there are tremendous, huge imports of meat substitutes into the CARICOM market. And so we want to be able to take advantage of all of those opportunities that are in CARICOM, in Latin America, and even there was a question earlier about Asia. We've actually have companies that are doing business, shipping products to China, and we have an interest in the Japan market. And so we are actively now engaging with parties in Jamaica as to how we could introduce specific Barbadian companies and products in the Asian market. So our export market drive is not only Latin America, CARICOM, within the diaspora communities, but also in Asia as well. Thank you.
Honorable Member for St. James Central.
Thank you once again, ma'am. I feel constrained, ma'am, to through you to the minister to congratulate his Director of Business Support Services because of the very clear exposition we are getting. And I really hope, ma'am, that this helps not only honorable members here gathered, but the country as a whole to understand the holistic benefits of having the kind of broadened network in the diplomatic corps to work on Barbados's behalf in emerging markets like Africa and in Latin America, and obviously to work with the diaspora wherever they are to be found across the world in order to advance Barbados's interests. That network of diplomatic activity, ma'am, helps us to have footprints in the sand, if you will, as we try to broaden the net of influence that Barbados can extend across the globe. But ma'am, the BIDC's focus abroad notwithstanding, and congratulating it as I must, I also feel that there's a duty for us to recognize that capacity has first and foremost to be built right here. The BIDC is, as I understand it, in charge of a lot of property and commercial space, tenanted in many instances here in Barbados, ma'am, to small and micro enterprises, which obviously are critical, and I have gone through that in every way, shape, or form already today, so I will not belabor the point. The concern I have, ma'am, is that we need to hear a little bit more, I think, from the minister and his team on the policy with regard to the use of these estates right now in the context of the COVID environment and coming out of the COVID environment in order to better facilitate business development in Barbados. I give you an example that is at the top of my mind. I visited around Christmas time an estate, a couple of estates. I was actually looking for a place where I could give life and make a lived reality out of the Prime Minister's express dream of having mechanics no longer be so often found alongside the road, blocking somebody's driveway, making it difficult for people to get access or egress from their homes, but to treat these business people, legitimate business people, with the dignity they deserve, and to find a place where we could start now to pool them and put them to work in collaboration with each other, perhaps in clusters or partnerships or wherever, but in a location that is not impeding public health, public service vehicles, ambulances, etc., etc. Now, ma'am, the challenge really was finding such locations. I stumbled across one in 6 Roads in St. Philip. And my question is, what is the policy of the BIDC to use its space in a way that we can now tangibly see is assisting these smaller enterprises to better facilitate that which they do, and to ensure the kind of developmental support is given to them, because they are a critical stakeholder and a partner in the developmental process for small and micro enterprises.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Interesting that you would have mentioned the issue of the mechanics bay, because, or the removal of mechanics from the streets, as it were, congesting and obstructing and polluting and all sorts of words that can be used. I'm sure that we all, as parliamentary representatives and constituency representatives, we have a number in our own constituency, but we have to look at the greater good, and it is a fact that some need to be moved. Some operate, even quite frankly, with attitude towards persons who live in the same district. And therefore, we accept that there has to be a role for the BIDC in ensuring that we can get more people involved to move to a better level. I want to let you know that in terms of the mechanics that you specifically mentioned, there is a place that has been not only identified by the BIDC, but where in fact the relevant team of, what shall I call them, architectural professionals, all the quantity surveyors and so on have already been engaged, and they're actively seeking to take us now to the next level where the rubber actually meets the road. This project is being undertaken in, actually in my constituency, in one of the industrial estates buildings, and I think originally it is to house something like 16 mechanics. It's going to be, obviously be, well, it's going to be a shared use facility. And when that is completed, we will then see how it operates, see it, using it as a pilot project to see how many more we can do. Obviously, if we have to move to a second such operation, we'll be able to move a lot faster than we have moved in this one, which has taken perhaps more time than we had thought it would have taken. Otherwise, I just want to say that the BIDC recognizes the need to ensure that people move post-COVID in the most constructive way possible. Some entities that have been disrupted need not be going back into business to resume operations doing what they did before. I think it's now incumbent, and the BIDC recognizes its role in ensuring that entities can now look at what opportunities were coughed up by the said COVID that you mentioned. I mean, you had operations where people realized that it was just as efficient, perhaps even more comfortable, and certainly even safer to operate from home, that everything didn't have to be done in the context of a physical office space and everybody didn't have to go into work. Therefore, they emerged the need for home office furniture. And that is an industry that people can seek to go into. Delivery services, moving generally along the lines of e-commerce. All these are things that I know that the BIDC, I know the BIDC is actively ensuring that they can communicate to the people who have been affected or even displaced by COVID, to ensure that they come back into the market, but not just to pick up where they left off, but to pick up where it's relevant and perhaps more beneficial for them to go. Now that you're on the BIDC, though, I want to make a general point, and it is this. You have, everyone puts the onus on the BIDC to do better, to deliver on more and more programs, and generally to generate more business activity and more manufacturing and more exports and so on, more productivity, more production in the country. But this thing, it calls for money. And no one has raised the issue so far today, but I believe that I can put it on the table now. The fact of the matter is that the BIDC is more of a financial burden on the government than it needs to be, because the BIDC receives a government subvention from government, a government subvention. Apart from that, unless they're hiding things from me, the only other source of income that I'm aware of is rent from tenants. And I want to say this, I am not any hard-nosed individual. I don't want to see people up on the road. I don't want to say anything like that. But the fact is that, generally speaking, tenants need to pay the rent that they're owing to the BIDC. And if I were to ask that the headline come out of this, most people may not want that headline, but I would like it to be that headline, that tenants need to pay BIDC their rent. I am not saying that in the context of COVID, one could have pounced upon the tenants at BIDC. And in fact, the records will show that between March last year and the end of last year, some $9.9 million, $900,000 were written off in rent owing or to the BIDC. They granted that in rent relief. First quarter is showing that it will end as I think another $600,000 that BIDC will be renting off, giving a rent relief to tenants. That's like $1.5 million in rent. If that were all that the BIDC had come to lose over the years in terms of rent, that may not be too bad. And I'm going to turn over shortly to the acting CEO, who is the finance officer, to give you the actual figures. And the chairman, I know, also wishes to speak on this. But the fact is that there was a pre-COVID when people ought to have been paying their rents to the BIDC. And every effort has been made to accommodate tenants who were in arrears as long ago as 2 years, well, when they came into the ministry in June 2018. Enforcement notices had been issued, not enforcement notices, notices to quit had been issued to tenants of the BIDC. And I actually said no, give everybody, well, the Prime Minister also agreed with me, give everybody 6 months. 6 months. And it wasn't 6 months to pay off the arrears and so as to avoid being evicted. It was so that you could go in, the tenants that is, could go into the BIDC and make an arrangement with the BIDC as to how they were going to pay the arrears. And all we were asking, the chairman and myself stood up at BMX subsequently in 2019, I think it was June or so, and that was a year after, although they had been a stay for 6 months, it went into a year, and we stood up, chairman next to me at BMX, indicating again to people, please go in and pay your rent to avoid eviction. And people, all we were asking was that people go in and just trend in the right direction. Show some element of good faith. That's all you ask of tenants, you know, at the BIDC. And instead you get some people who owe the BIDC as much as $1.2 million in arrears of rent and are still tenants of BIDC. No, fear is fear. You understand COVID, you grant relief in hardship, in hard times. But how are you expect an institution to run when in fact a major source of its revenue? You know how many programs you see them, Ms. Lois, that you're here speaking here, can be running if she had the sort of mind that you will hear shortly when I turn over to the acting CEO, is owed to the BIDC in terms of rent. So come on, people, you know, we just got to be reasonable. We're meeting you halfway, meet us halfway. And as I said, if a headline could come out of this, it would be, please pay your rent. You know, I feel that when you go someplace to live in a rental scenario, one of the primary sets of money you should set aside every month is your rent. You should really set it aside. But I must say the BIDC is not getting a fair break. It's not getting a good deal. And I will ask now the acting CEO, Mr. Dwayne Stewart, to give an indication as to the amount of rent that is owing to the BIDC. And after him, the chairman, I'm sure, wishes to say a few words as well.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Dwayne Stewart, CEO, acting BIDC. As the Minister has requested, the amount that is owed to the corporation on the books right now, approximately $6 million. However, I want to express a bit of clarity when it comes to that number, because there are some persons who are still tenants of the BIDC, still operating in the space, and because the arrears may have been removed from the books in terms of the accounting, we are still tracking the amounts that are owed by those persons. So persons who are in the space and are owing the BIDC, the arrears currently stand at about $12 million in arrears. As the Minister indicated, we have some pretty large amounts owed in terms of, one tenant for sure owes $1.2 million, and that person is still in the space. And we're speaking about arrears that are owing for a number of years. So even pre-COVID, in terms of not paying, it continues to hamper our operations. And when we think of the fact that there's that same space that is occupied, we have had at least 2 or 3 expressions of interest from persons who would want to get into space, in terms of persons who are currently in business, profitable businesses, that are looking for the size square footage that is there. But the challenge, of course, is persons not paying their rent, and then, of course, us acting upon the notices to quit to evict persons from our space. The minister also made reference to the amount of arrears over the years, and it can indicate that we have, as a corporation, over the years, written off approximately $20 million of arrears off of our books. So the $6 million that's still on the books, plus $20 million written off over the years, gives you an indication of the amount of arrears or lack of payment that the corporation has had to endure. And as also articulated by the minister, so far for 2020-2021, that financial year, we estimate rental reductions in terms of persons who have asked for COVID relief for approximately $1.5, $1.6 million. So the corporation has been making those allowances, but of course it has an impact upon our overall numbers, because our rental revenue, where we would have estimated to come in at approximately $10 million, we're now estimated to come in at about $8 million. So we can appreciate the difference when it comes to COVID, but even without that, the lack of persons making the payments continues to impact us severely when it comes to our operations and being able to execute our programs. Thank you.
I think you wanted to say something.
Minister and Madam Chair, from those figures that you just heard.
Sir, please introduce yourself.
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is John Rocheford, and I am the present chairman of the Barbados Investment and Development Corporation. From the figures that you've just heard, it cannot be business as usual. This is not a proper way to run any organization or any business, because we are being asked to continue with our various projects and so on, but yet our revenue is decreasing year on year. You heard about one organization owing somewhere in the region of 1.2 million, but that's only one. We have other organizations, some like 944,000, for example, 861,000, 794,000, 596,000, 540,000, and the list goes on and on. And yet, these delinquents are allowed to continue to occupy the BIDC space. This has a significant impact on the corporation, because increased dependence on government subvention to support business development arm of the corporation is not good. And we need to have less dependence on government's finances, because this obviously puts a strain on government's resources. It is also hampering the corporation's renovation and retrofitting of rental spaces, and it hampers the preventative maintenance program in the estates, and we have to continue to upkeep the particular buildings in the various estates. It has a significant impact, a lack of funding for business development projects. We desperately need to build out the proper infrastructure to support entrepreneurs and exporters in growing and developing their businesses. This is the key. The mandate of the corporation also suffers as a result of a lack of these rent receipts, since all of the programs of the business development arm of the corporation cannot be sustained by the Special Technical Assistance Fund. So we definitely need to make sure that we get the tenants either to pay rent or vacate the spaces. There are a lot of artisans in Barbados. There are a lot of artists out there with fantastic products, and they would like somewhere to come and showcase these products. I mean, you have people like in pottery, for example, doing some fantastic pieces of pottery where people, especially in the Canadian market, been, you know, anxious to get their hands on this. We don't need to import any cheap things out of China. And we have a lot of artisans, and we need to find somewhere for them to showcase their products. And yet we have people in the various locations who refuse to pay rent. We met with some of them, and we came to an agreement where they would at least pay something towards the arrears and come to some sort of payment agreement. And no sooner that they walked through the doors of the BIDC, they forgot about it, and some have not paid a cent since then. It cannot continue as usual. I'm very sorry to say it, but if the corporation is to carry on with this various projects and so on, we need to now take action. Okay? So that's all I have to say at this point in time. But Minister, yes, I agree with you. Something has to be done. It has to be done now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Honourable Member for Christchurch South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What I was particularly attracted to the intervention made by the Honourable Member for St. James Central, he having some interest in the matter in his ministerial capacity, and I was also attracted by the response from the Honourable Minister who is before the House at this point. And I do not intervene in any defense of deliberate delinquency. My intervention, again, is aimed at wondering whether this is not an opportunity, like my friend from the Honourable Member for St. James Central said, if this crisis really ought not to be translated into a policy of embracing a new kind of entrepreneur. And sometimes we use the word young people to the point where it becomes a cliche. But we all know that there are hundreds, perhaps thousands of young people out there with skills, with an interest in business. And here it is, we have an agency of government which, and this is not to be disparaging, but which, whose portfolio has become largely that of a rent collecting agency. This minister who is before the House, he and I have particular connection with Grisettes. And of course, one of the other members of this House who spoke, the Honourable Member for St. James North. The three of us have particular boyhood connection with Grisette, so we know what we're talking about. And we know that in the 1960s and 70s, and perhaps in the 1980s as well, that Grisette's industrial estate was a hive of employment. The government of the day, or the governments of the day, had pursued Sir Arthur Lewis's industrialization by invitation policy. And it was a policy aimed at employing young Barbadians. And it was, we as a country were investing in foreign business persons, and they were investing in the employment of our population. At the same time, those foreign businesses, many of them were foreign, were given 10-year tax holidays. And that was greatly advantageous to them. In other words, we were making concessions to accommodate them in this country. And I wonder now if we ought not to be pursuing a policy of similarly investing in our young people. Madam Chair, I will emphasize, I am not defending deliberate delinquency. I am now focusing on a new and emerging class of young business persons. and wondering if they may not be embraced in the same manner in which we embraced foreign businesses 40, 50, 60 years ago. And I'm wondering if this is not the opportunity, Minister. I wonder if this may not be placed on the agenda in a new dispensation, so that we move away from the traditional way of doing business, we move away from the traditional way of encouraging business. Because we all know that when a young person, 20, 21 years old, comes into business, his problem is capital. He can't pay rent. He can't pay a light bill. And as I said earlier to the other minister, St. James Central, we are, I believe, moving into an era where energy costs will be cheaper. If that is the case, can we find it possible as a nation of taxpayers to provide housing space for young business persons and let their costs be minimal? It's an investment in our young people. Can this be contemplated as a new governmental policy? That's my question.
Honourable Member, I don't think we are really at cross purposes at all. I'm just saying the point I made earlier this was just made in the context of the fact that you have to pretty much make a choice. Yes, I already indicated the extent to which BADC is, despite the rental arrears outstanding, is pursuing an approach where it is creating and developing this cadre of people that you just mentioned, the people who can now go forward post-COVID. That is being worked on. My point merely is that the amount that the corporation can do is severely compromised when it doesn't have any resources. All that you can make a decision that the corporation doesn't have to collect rent. That can be a policy construct. But that will mean that central government will have to be prepared to put a larger sum of money into the corporation for it to be able to carry out its programs. I don't think we are at cross purposes at all, because all that you're asking to be done and that the member for St. James Central had raised, I've already said that the corporation is in fact pursuing. It's pursuing despite the fact that it doesn't have enough resources at its disposal to do those things comfortably. I'm just merely saying that if you want the corporation to do more and more programs, it has to be put into more and more funds.
Honourable member for St. George South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a wonderful trend, and I am glad that someone other than myself in this Lord Chamber raised the whole aspect of youth employment, and not me as the Minister of Youth, Sports and Community Empowerment. But the whole aspect and concept and reality, I should say, of COVID-19 and its mitigation measures have changed the concept of work and the future of jobs in this country. And I'm happy that the member for Christchurch South and also the member for St. James Central raised these points, because the whole aspect for BADC must be somewhat design-driven export, must be somewhat innovative, where we have industrial value creation from our young people. We have the ocean, we have the bioeconomy, we have renewable energy. These are some of the frontiers that I hinted when I spoke in my first intervention this afternoon. But I am happy that the members in here in the lower chamber have pushed it somewhat further so I can dive into the areas that I believe BADC must transition, and transition quickly if we are indeed to reduce our trade deficit. Time has come for us not only to export goods but to export services. And I raised some of the issues. The ocean. We have some 1.5 million jobs with respect to seafarers in the world right now. And there are goods that we can produce by utilizing the resources of the ocean. And that is the trust that I want our industry, industrial value creation, and that's the whole focus of BIDC, should be the focus of BIDC, in creating new jobs, pushing new frontiers. Since the concept of work and the whole aspect of the future of jobs have changed internationally. But I also want to go further, Madam Chair, and this question is directed to the chairman of BIDC. I heard him in his statement give me mainly challenges with respect to collecting rent. And I expect that during the COVID-19 crisis, as we seek to battle with it and create measures to come out of it, that we will be lenient on those tenants. Because while they owe rent prior to COVID-19, and that is where I am going with the chairman, because we are now speaking about the whole aspect of COVID and the challenges, but what were some of the measures that were put in place? If you recognize this is your main revenue generating stream, we can't now come at the third year to tell us, yes, we had challenges with collecting rent and giving up the story. I hope I'm not being too hard on you, Chairman, but the whole focus on having the plan in place to address these delinquent tenants, that is what we want to hear prior to COVID, and also how you're going to treat with it as we battle the pandemic and also after COVID. I've not heard a plan from you as you presented to this Lord Chamber and to the country, because we need to hear from you. What are some of the plans? Thank you, Madam Chair, and over to the Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Minister. When it comes to the situation of rent arrears, it's not happening 3 years after. When this board came together back in 2018, one of the things we recognized is that we did have a problem with our finances as a result of the reduction in our revenue from people who are delinquent in their rent. So from day one, we were trying to see what we can do and reach out to these various tenants in order to get them to pay their rent. During COVID, we were still, even though they owed us all this money, we were still seen as a good corporate citizen because we did waivers of rent and deferrals with rent reductions of at least 75% for the months of April and May of 2020, and then a reduction in rent of 50% for the month of June 2020. And we made other allowances in rent over the period of time during the whole COVID pandemic. So it's not to say that we were not working towards the rent collections over the period of time, but in addition to that, we were meeting with them and seeing how we can help them. If we can help them with the business plans and so on, we'd ask some of them to come to us with a business plan so we see how we can go forward. Some of them didn't have a business plan at all. We tried to see how we can get them to put together a SWOT analysis. Some of them didn't even know what a SWOT analysis was. So they're just operating in a business and it's sort of like a ship without a rudder, just going all over the place. But we have reached out to try to help them to see how we can get their business back on track and to make them more profitable. So some of them are not even interested in listening to us. But what do? We cannot, as I said, we have a lot of artisans out there who are quite willing, young people with their products who are quite willing to find somewhere to showcase their products. But we don't have the space ready for them to do it because there are people occupying space who are doing nothing besides just using the place as a storage facility for some other reason. We can't continue with that, Minister. What can we do? We will need to make sure that we get those delinquent people out of the corporation's facilities so we can get people who are interested in moving ahead with their businesses and working with our business development officers to expand their business and probably see how we can get them into the various programs that we have and assist them with some sort of exports through our export readiness program. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, I invite you to give your wrap-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all honorable members and also all members of my team who spoke in this debate this afternoon. I think that the discussion was quite refreshing. Obviously, everything that was said or is said will not be agreed to by everyone else, but I think I was able to demonstrate to the Chamber and to the country as a whole that this ministry is taking its responsibility very seriously. We have to transform the way that things are done. We have to do so for the benefit of the international business sector. We have to transform the way in which our manufacturing enterprises can function. So we have to engage, in my view, in an industrial transformation, almost an industrial revolution. We are confronting the fourth industrial revolution, and therefore we can't use first and second industrial revolution techniques to cope with the changes that we're being confronted with. We are embracing with open arms the fact that we have to resort to new technology. We have to resort to innovation. Technology, in fact, is now so widespread in some developed countries that if we do not get our act together, we're going to find that technology in those developed countries will, in fact, replace the low-skilled labor and jobs and so on that those countries go offshore to get the benefit of. They're no longer going offshore because they're using technology to remain onshore, called technically reshoring, to do away with the jobs that are the relatively low-skilled jobs, as for want of a better expression, that are sometimes or low-cost jobs that are provided to the enterprises. So the ministry has a lot of work to do. We have embarked upon doing it, and we intend to continue to ensure that we go on the cusp of where we can go. We want to go to cutting-edge technology, ensure we can bring the benefits that the country needs in terms of business expansion and job creation and the overall betterment and expansion of the Barbadian economy. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. As the head was already moved, the question is that head 39 in the amount of $17,846,845 stand part. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do report progress to His Honour the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
Question is, I do not seconder. Question is that I do not report to His Honour the Speaker the what was it? To report progress and ask for leave to sit again. All members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman of committees has reported progress and asks for leave to sit again. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Mr. Speaker, we have come to the end of our business for today, and I therefore ask that this sitting be postponed, suspended until tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Members are reminded that we will start promptly, since we would not go through the normal formalities at the start of the normal Tuesday sitting.
It is therefore incumbent that honorary members be present so as A, to ensure that there is a quorum for 10 o'clock sharp. So please be punctual. The question is that this honorable chamber be suspended until 10 a.m. in the forenoon tomorrow morning. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 10 a.m. in the forenoon tomorrow.